Hey everyone, Brian here from Native Instruments. In this video, we're going to be going over KONTAKT 7 and how to get the most out of this powerful tool. Whether this is your first time using KONTAKT and you just don't know where to begin, or you're comfortable loading instruments and want to know what else you can do, this video is for you. We're going to start with the very basics of understanding what is KONTAKT and how to get it up and running, to creating multi-layered instruments and much more. So sit back and let's get started. Before we dive into the inner workings of KONTAKT 7, let's first understand what is KONTAKT. KONTAKT, put simply, is an instrument platform. KONTAKT itself doesn't actually generate sound, but is used to play back audio samples. So essentially, KONTAKT is a sampler. KONTAKT lets you load instruments that were created using the KONTAKT platform, or what we call KONTAKT libraries, as well as letting you create your own custom KONTAKT instruments. Many of the instruments from Native Instruments were created using KONTAKT, and there's also tons of other companies out there that create their products using KONTAKT. Now, there are two different versions of KONTAKT 7. There's the player version of KONTAKT and then the full version of KONTAKT. The first one we'll look at is KONTAKT 7 Player. So KONTAKT 7 Player is completely free, and you can actually get a copy of this from the Native Instruments website. All of the instruments from Native Instruments that use KONTAKT will work with the player version of KONTAKT. And there's also a handful of third-party libraries out there that will also work with the player version of KONTAKT. The full version of KONTAKT 7 has all of the same features as the player version, with a few additional things, such as the ability to edit and create your own instruments inside of KONTAKT. Now, the full version of KONTAKT is a paid version of KONTAKT. You can either purchase KONTAKT 7 by itself, or if you're purchasing a bundle like Complete Standard, Ultimate, or the Collector's Edition, KONTAKT 7 is actually included in that bundle. Now, if you're just looking to load KONTAKT libraries, tweak some sounds, and use them for a project, the player version of KONTAKT should work just fine. Now, if you do want to create your own custom KONTAKT libraries or dive under the hood and really tweak how the instrument works, you would need the full version of KONTAKT. So when purchasing a third-party library, just double check in the tech specs or system requirements which version of KONTAKT is required. So as you can see for this product, Damage 2, it says that it works with the player version of KONTAKT. So just something to look out for. Now that we have a general idea of the differences between KONTAKT 7 Player and the full version, let's take a look how to install it on your computer and a few additional KONTAKT libraries. The program we're going to use to install KONTAKT 7 and any KONTAKT libraries is called Native Access 2. So you can download Native Access 2 by going to nativeinstruments.com/native access. On this page, you have the option to download Native Access for Windows, Macs using the M1 chip, or Macs using the Intel chip. So depending on your computer specifications, just click the download button that pertains to your computer system. Once Native Access 2 is installed and you open the program, you'll then want to log into your Native Instruments account, or what we call your Native ID. Once you're logged in, to install KONTAKT 7, what you'll do is click on Available and then go to the Applications tab. And you can see here, I have KONTAKT 7 as an available install. So I'm just going to click the Install button and wait for this installation to finish. Now that KONTAKT 7 has been installed, you're free to start installing some additional KONTAKT libraries. So to see what you have available, you can click on Available and then select the KONTAKT filtering. And this will show you all available KONTAKT instruments. So instruments that are specific to KONTAKT. Now, you can always just click the Install button and these instruments will be installed directly to your computer. You can see, though, that Damage 2 and Hybrid Keys, these are fairly large libraries. Damage 2 is 24.33 gigabytes and Hybrid Keys is almost 4 gigabytes. Depending on how much space you have left on your computer, you can actually install these libraries to an external hard drive, saving space on your computer's hard drive. So to change that, you would just go to the preferences down below, and what you would want to change is the content location. So just to explain, the download location is where the installation file will be installed to. Once the library or the application has been installed, that installation file will be deleted. The application location is where the application and also all of the important preference files will be installed to. So generally, you don't really want to change the download or application location. What you do want to change is the content location. So to change the content location, just click the Browse button, and all you have to do is select the external hard drive that you want the library to be installed to. In this case, I have a folder on my external drive called Native Library, and I will just select Open, and now we're all set. The only thing to note is if you do want to use these libraries or instruments, you'll need to have that external hard drive connected to your computer. So to install, I'm just going to exit out and then just click the Install button below the library I want to install. Once you've installed KONTAKT 7 and any additional libraries you want to use, you're free to close out of Native Access and we can start using KONTAKT 7. So now that we've installed KONTAKT 7 and a handful of KONTAKT libraries, this is the point where we'll open up KONTAKT. And we have two ways of opening KONTAKT. So you can either open KONTAKT as a standalone application, so outside of your DAW, or you could load it as a plugin inside of your DAW like Ableton Logic or Cubase. Now, if this is the first time you've installed and are opening up KONTAKT, what I would recommend doing is opening KONTAKT as a standalone application first, just so that KONTAKT can build its library database so that once you do open it inside of your DAW, all of the libraries that you've installed will open up properly. For this video, we're going to be using KONTAKT as a plugin inside of a DAW, but if you choose to use KONTAKT as a standalone application, there's really two things that you just want to take a quick look at just to make sure things are set up properly. So I have KONTAKT 7 open as a standalone application, and really the two things I want to check are my audio and MIDI settings. So to get to KONTAKT settings, just click this gear icon at the top, and the two tabs we'll take a look at are the audio and MIDI. So under audio, the three things we'll just take a quick look at are the device, sample rate, and latency settings. So under device, this is where you would select the audio interface that you're currently using for your system. So in my case, I'm using the Apollo X8 interface. So under device, you can see it says Universal Audio Thunderbolt. If you are using another interface like a Complete Audio 6 or another type of interface, all you would do is just click the drop down and select the correct interface that you're currently using on your system. Now, the other two things are sample rate and latency settings. Now, for sample rate, typically when dealing with music, it's set to a value of 44.1. In my case, I have it set to 48,000 just because that's the sample rate that my audio interface is selected to. The sample rate here doesn't have anything to do with the sampling rate of the recorded samples in the KONTAKT instruments. If the sample rate that you have set here is different than the sampling rate of your KONTAKT instruments, KONTAKT will actually do all of the conversions behind the scenes, so you don't really have to worry about that at all. Now, lastly, the latency settings. This is basically the time from when you press a key on your keyboard to when you're actually hearing sound. So having a lower latency value will shorten that amount of time, but if you are playing a lot of voices or a lot of notes simultaneously, this is a little bit more taxing on your computer and can lead to certain clicks and pops. So if you are experiencing that, you can always try increasing the latency settings, and usually that will resolve that issue. So these settings inside of KONTAKT, the device, sample rate, and latency settings, these are specific to KONTAKT in the standalone application version. Now, the other tab we'll just take a quick look at is the MIDI tab. So this is where you would turn on and off certain MIDI devices or MIDI keyboards, again, if you were using KONTAKT in a standalone application version. So the main keyboard I'm using is the Complete Control S61, and under my inputs list, you can see the keyboard here. And if this is set to off, all you would have to do is just click here and change this to port A. So this way, when I play keys on the S61, KONTAKT is able to receive those MIDI messages and trigger the corresponding note in whatever KONTAKT library I have loaded. But again, these settings for audio and MIDI, these are specific for KONTAKT in the standalone application version. The audio and the MIDI settings, if you were using KONTAKT as a plugin, those you would actually change inside of your DAW's settings. So at this point, I'm going to be using KONTAKT 7 as a plugin inside of my DAW. Now, my DAW of choice is Cubase, but Logic, Ableton, Pro Tools, FL Studio, all of those DAWs are fine. As long as the DAW that you're using is able to load a plugin, you'll be able to follow along. For the most part, everything is identical that I will be showing you. All of the features of KONTAKT will be the same. Really, the only things that might be different are, how do you open up a blank instance of KONTAKT? So let's just start with that. So I have Cubase open right now. And again, how you load a plugin inside of your DAW, that's going to be DAW specific. But in terms of Cubase, what I'll do is I'm just going to click this plus sign here and select an instrument. And for my instrument, I'm just going to make sure that I have KONTAKT 7 selected. You can also just name the track if you want. So I'll just name this KONTAKT and click Add Track. So before we dive into the features of KONTAKT, let's just take a look at the interface just so we can get familiar with the different components of KONTAKT. So at the top here on the left, this is your main control panel. So you can do different things such as viewing the traditional layout or viewing the updated browser from KONTAKT. You can save, create new KONTAKT instruments. You can load, save KONTAKT instruments. You can access the settings of KONTAKT. But one of the buttons that is super helpful is the workspaces icon. So in this area here, we're able to show and hide different workspaces, different areas of KONTAKT to either access additional features or give us information as to what we're controlling. So for example, if I select info, when I put my mouse over, let's say monitor, the info panel down below will provide me some information as to what I'm clicking on, whether it's a knob, a fader, or a button. So again, in this example, my mouse is on monitor and it's saying it provides an overview of system resources in use. So if you're ever unsure as to what you're controlling or what you're about to click on, just make sure that info is selected and you'll be able to get a little bit of a blurb as to what you're controlling. So in here, you can also turn on and off different things such as the virtual keyboard. So with the virtual keyboard, you can actually just click on the keys and it will play whatever KONTAKT library you have currently loaded. So again, we're going to be covering all of this a little bit later on in the video, but just familiarize yourself a little bit with the different workspaces here. So I'm just going to hide the virtual keyboard for right now. Now, the two other areas that you'll be dealing with the most are the instrument browser section on the left and the rack view on the right. So on the left-hand side here, this is where all of your KONTAKT libraries that you've installed are located. So as you see, as I'm scrolling through this list, there's tons and tons of different libraries that I can choose from. When you load an instrument inside of KONTAKT, that instrument is going to be loading in the rack space on the right. So when you want to do some sound design and customize the instrument or the sound that you're using, you'd be dealing with the rack space on the right-hand side. Let's start from the very beginning. How do you load an instrument inside of KONTAKT and find the sound that you're looking for? I just want to clear out what I have currently loaded here. And to do that, I can just click the save icon and select Reset Multi and click OK. And now we're starting with a blank instance of KONTAKT 7. So the first thing you probably want to figure out how to do is find an instrument, find a preset, and load it into KONTAKT. So the window that we're looking at right now, this is the traditional view of KONTAKT. So previous versions of KONTAKT, like KONTAKT 6 and before, this is the view that you've probably seen in the past if you've used KONTAKT. Now with KONTAKT 7, we've updated the browser, making it a lot easier to find the sound that you're looking for. So to access the new browser, all you have to do is just click the icon here, and this will bring up the new browser in KONTAKT 7. So this area down below where you see all of these individual KONTAKT libraries, this is the same list in the traditional view where we had that list of instruments on the left-hand side. With the new browser, it's basically broken up into, nice product images, and it's a lot easier visually to actually find what you're looking for. So you can always scroll down in this list, and if there's a KONTAKT library that you know of or you want to choose, all you have to do is just click on it, and the presets for the selected library will show up on the left-hand side here. Now I'm just going to deselect this and just start with all of my presets. So when viewing all of my presets, you can see in the bottom right, I have over 85,000 presets to choose from. So with KONTAKT 7's new updated browser, we've introduced a filtering system that allows you to think of a type of sound rather than thinking of an individual KONTAKT instrument. So let's say I'm looking for a particular sound. What I can do is just click on the sound type here and say, I'm looking for a bass sound. And you can always go one level further and select the character area and say, I'm looking for a bass sound that is analog. Now, what's changed in the browser, all of the instruments on the bottom section, it's basically showing me instruments that have presets that match the bass and analog filter. And the presets list on the right, you can see now that I have 756 presets to choose from. So this is a huge improvement from the 85,000 that I previously had without the filtering. Now, what's also cool is any of the presets that you see here, when you click on them, you actually hear an audio preview, so you know what the preset sounds like without actually having to load the full KONTAKT instrument. So this is a huge time saver just because some KONTAKT libraries are extremely long and can take a little while to actually load. So at least this gives you a sense of what the preset sounds like, and you're basically able to find the sound that you're looking for a lot quicker. So I'll just click on some of these. Now, if you ever need to adjust the audio preview volume, you can always use the volume slider down below here. So right now we're looking at all presets, and these are all of the presets from all of these instruments that you see in this list here. So you can always select one of the KONTAKT libraries in the center. So let's just select Analog Dreams. And now I'm able to see the presets that match the bass and analog category specifically for Analog Dreams. Now you'll notice some of these presets have a star next to them, and that's because I've favorited those presets. So if we just take a listen to one of them, all you have to do is move your mouse over and you can just click this star and it's going to add that preset to your favorites list. So you might be scrolling through some presets and you hear something that you like, but maybe it doesn't quite fit the project that you're working on. You can always favorite it and access it at a later date. So to access your favorites list, all you have to do is click the star at the top here. And I'm just going to deselect bass and analog just so we can see all of my favorites. So I have Analog Dreams still selected, so I'll just deselect it. And now you can see all of my favorited presets across all of these instruments here. So, over time, you'll listen, you'll find more presets. If you like them, just favorite them. It's going to be a lot easier to find them later on than, hopefully stumbling upon it later on when you're working on another project. So all of these are sounds that I've liked and, have used for a project or might want to use them for a project. Now that sounds cool. So let's get out of the favorites and back to the main instrument browser in KONTAKT. So if there is a specific instrument that you're looking for or the name of a preset, what you can always do is just click the search area at the top and type in the name of a KONTAKT library. So for example, there's one that I always love using called Farlight. and I can just type it in, and there we go. There's Farlight. Now, when I select it, one thing that also appears in the presets list is all banks. So this area here, it's another level of preset filter refinement. So inside of Farlight, I can select, I'm looking for a pad sound, and it's going to refine the presets list even more. And all of these presets will be under the pad bank inside of Farlight. You know what? I like that sound. Let's favorite it for something else down the road. So I'll just clear out the search area here. All of the Kontakt libraries from Native Instruments will appear in the main browser in the center. Now, there's also other companies out there like Spitfire, Output, Heaviosity, Orchestral Tools. All of them create instruments using Kontakt's platform. So if you've purchased these instruments from third-party companies before, a lot of them will automatically show up in Kontakt's browser. For example, Albion 1 is made by a company called Spitfire. So I can select it and view all of the presets for this Kontakt instrument. Now, there are some Kontakt instruments out there that won't automatically show up in the main browser here, but with Kontakt 7's updated browser, you can actually load these and save these libraries directly in this browser, or you can save it into your user folder here. So with these libraries, if you need to add them to the browser, or you want to add these instruments to your user folder, all you have to do is just click the settings icon here and choose between importing the library into the custom libraries area or the user presets. So again, the custom libraries area, once you add the library, it will show up in this main browser here, whereas loading something in the user presets area will show up in the user folder. So as an example, I'm going to do the custom libraries and select add. And there's a Kontakt library that I have from a company called ADO Clocks that doesn't automatically show up in the main browser. So from here, I can just select ADO Clocks, click open. And now if I close out of this window, you can see it's now in Kontakt's main browser. So I can select it and I can view and load any of the presets from this Kontakt library. Now, one thing to note though is you may or may not hear an audio preview, and that really just depends on if the person or the company that created this instrument included those audio preview files in their instrument. So in the case of ADO Clocks, there isn't an audio preview. So if you want to hear the preset, you actually just have to double click on it and load it into Kontakt and then be able to play it. Now that we know how to use Kontakt's browser, let's load up an instrument into Kontakt and learn how to play it and start customizing the sound. I'm going to load up something from Analog Dreams, and let's just listen to a few presets and find something that sounds cool. So I've favorited this preset. I like it. It sounds good. So to load this into Kontakt, all you have to do is just double click it and it will load into Kontakt's rack view. So with Analog Dreams loaded, there are a few ways you can actually trigger the sound and play this instrument. Really the first way is, if you have a MIDI keyboard connected and configured properly inside of your DAW, you can just start playing the keys on the keyboard and you'll be able to hear some sound. Now, Kontakt also has a virtual keyboard, which you're able to view by clicking the workspaces icon here and selecting keyboard. And now down below, we can see the virtual keyboard. And if I use my mouse, I'm able to click on any of the keys to play back Analog Dreams. So in addition to the virtual keyboard being able to trigger the sound of the instrument you have loaded, depending on what Kontakt instrument you do have loaded, it's actually going to provide you some visual feedback. So I'm going to close out of this window quickly and load up another Kontakt library. So this is the Symphony Series String Ensemble. And you'll notice that the virtual keys down here, they're not all yellow. I have red, yellow, green, and blue. So in the case of this Kontakt instrument, the color of the keys is actually letting me know what instruments are playing in those different sections. So for example, with the red keys, these are the bass strings. Yellow are cellos, green are violas, and the blues are violins. So depending on what Kontakt library you have loaded, the visual feedback from the virtual keyboard will be different. I recommend just keeping the virtual keyboard open. If you do have a MIDI controller and you're using that to play, at least you can use the virtual keyboard to give you some additional information about what Kontakt library you have loaded. Once your instrument's loaded, this is the point where you can start doing some sound design and customizing the sound to fit the track that you're working on. So every instrument, every interface is going to be slightly different, but in the case of Analog Dreams, this interface is very simple, where essentially I have these 8 knobs that let me kind of refine the sound. So if I play a note on my MIDI keyboard and start turning any of these knobs, it'll start manipulating the sound. Now, if you started tweaking the knobs and you still haven't really dialed in the sound, or it's not exactly what you're looking for, what you can always do is select another preset, or what they're called in Kontakt are snapshots. In the interface with Analog Dreams, up at the top here, this is your snapshot selection. So I can just click this triangle and now I have additional filtering options. So before, this was a bass sound, but I could choose something different. I could select pads, and let's select iceberg. So I'm in the pads category right now, and if you quickly want to go through the different snapshots within this category, you can always just use the left and the right arrow here and just start finding the sound that you want. So this one sounds pretty cool. Let's just tweak some of the knobs here and see what we can get out of it. All right, so some really rough sound design. Now, we've used the Mona Lisa preset as kind of our starting point. We've turned some knobs and essentially created our own sound out of it. Now, what you can do is actually save this as your own snapshot, and it will get saved to your user library. So if you've adjusted the knobs and you want to save it, all you have to do is click the save icon here, and you can name the preset whatever you want. So in this case, we'll just say it's Brian's amazing pad and click on save. Now, to access any of the user snapshots that you've created, once you have an instrument loaded, again, in this case, it's Analog Dreams, when you click the snapshot icon here, before we only had factory, but now we have user. So any snapshots that you create and you save will appear in the user tab down below. And the user tab is instrument specific. So if I do load up a whole other Kontakt library and click on the snapshots dropdown, you may or may not see user, but you're not going to be able to access the Analog Dreams preset that you created. Now, if you ever just want to load a completely new Kontakt instrument, there's a couple ways that you can go about doing this. So first, if you want to clear out this instrument, you can just click the X icon up here and it will remove this one from the rack view. We previously also learned that you can just click the save icon here and just say reset multi, and it will remove anything in the rack view in the center. Now, another way to load a completely new instrument is you can either go back to the new browser in Kontakt, or we can also just use the traditional browser on the left. So if I want to, let's say, load 40's very own keys, I can just click on Instruments, click on the .nki file, and just drag it on top of Analog Dreams, and it will replace whatever you have in the center here. Now, occasionally what will happen is, maybe you just double click on one of these Kontakt libraries. What will happen is it's going to add this library just below the existing one that you have. Now, there's a very good reason for that, which we'll be covering next. But in the event that this does happen, what I would recommend doing is just removing both of them and then just reloading the instrument that you were originally just trying to load. So now we only have one instrument inside of Kontakt's rack view. So as we saw, when I was trying to load another instrument inside of Kontakt, I actually had two Kontakt instruments loaded at the same time. In Kontakt, you can actually have up to 64 different Kontakt instruments loaded into one instance of Kontakt simultaneously. So this really allows you to create a crazy complex layered instrument. So rather than just having an instrument like a piano, you could actually have a piano combined with a full string section with a synth pad and some sort of, arpeggiated bass all inside of one instance of Kontakt. So this is called a Kontakt multi-instrument. So let's take a look how to set this up and kind of what it all sounds like. The first thing I want to do is reset the instance of Kontakt, basically just starting with a clean slate here. So again, to do that, I'm just going to click this icon and select Reset Multi, and then click OK. So this basically just clears out everything inside of Kontakt's rack view. Now, the first step to creating a Kontakt multi-instrument is loading your first instrument. So to start, I'm going to go back to Kontakt's updated browser and select my first instrument. So we were talking about a piano, so let's just start with a piano sound. So to do that, I will find Alicia's keys and just take a quick listen to one of these presets. All right, so this one sounds good. Now, before I load this preset, what I'm gonna do is click this pin icon here. So basically what happens is if I double click on one of these presets, the browser is actually gonna stay here and I can still add more presets rather than having to jump back and forth between the new browser, the traditional view, and then going back into the updated browser. So we'll just double click on this preset. There we go. And now let's find something else to load. So I'm going to actually load a orchestral library. So I like to use the Symphony Series String Ensemble. And let's find it in the list here. There we go. So I'll click this and let's just do the full ensemble. So I'll just double click here. And now from here, I can just click the X and go back to the traditional layout of Kontakt. As you can see, I have the instance of Alicia's keys here and also the Symphony Series String Ensemble. Right off the bat, if I just start playing my MIDI keyboard, all we're going to hear is just the piano sound. And the reason for that is Kontakt doesn't automatically set up the MIDI input routing for every instrument that you start loading. So that's something that we need to configure for any library that we're loading simultaneously inside of Kontakt. So above each instrument, you have this section here, which is called the instrument header. So for Alicia's keys, we're looking at the snapshot view. So this is again where you're able to select different snapshots or presets for that instrument. But with the Symphony series, it looks a little bit different. And this is because we are in the info view where you're able to change settings like the audio output and the MIDI input settings, which is what we need to change. So for Alicia's keys, we'll just click the I to select the info view. And this is where you're able to change the MIDI input. So currently Alicia's keys is set to port A, channel 1. And you can see that it says A1. So what we need to do is change the MIDI input on Symphony series to match Alicia's keys. So we'll go down to the Symphony series, select here, and you can choose port A and channel 1. Now, while we're here, one thing I do want to point out is this Omni setting. So with Omni, this is basically just telling Kontakt that no matter what MIDI device you have connected, even if you have 10 MIDI keyboards connected simultaneously, it's always going to be receiving MIDI from literally any source. So if you have multiple keyboards connected and you just want one specific keyboard to control your multi, you would just need to configure the correct ports and MIDI channels. So again, for the purpose of this video, we're just going to match the MIDI input from Symphony series to match Alicia's keys. So we'll go to port A and channel 1. So now once I play the keys on the keyboard, we'll be able to hear the piano and the string ensemble simultaneously. One thing you can actually do is click the Kontakt logo icon here, and it will fold up the instruments very nicely. So let's find one more instrument. So one that I actually like using a lot is called Straylight. So I'll just search in the search field here and click and drag Straylight onto the empty space in the rack view. And once the instrument loads, we can find a preset that we like. So I'm just going to go to the snapshot section and just choose pads and just choose something random. Let's just do, cello cloud here. And remember, now we also need to configure the MIDI input for Straylight. So I'll just click on info and select the MIDI channel, port A, channel 1. And, we can just fold this up for now. Let's take a listen. All right, so that was not a great instrument, so let's just choose something else and find something that works. So from here, you can start customizing the individual instances or the individual sounds of each Kontakt library that you have loaded. So again, for Straylight, if I just click the Kontakt logo, I can start, messing with the parameters inside of Straylight and kind of further craft the sound a little bit. Now, if I'm playing my MIDI keyboard, I'm going to hear all 3 sounds simultaneously. So if you need to either mute or solo an individual Kontakt instrument, you can just use the solo or the mute button that is in the instrument header on each of your instruments that you have loaded. So if I just click S for solo, now I'm just going to hear Straylight. And then all together. I like the sound of Straylight, but it's coming in a little bit hot. So what you can also do is on each Kontakt library, you have a volume slider, so you can increase or decrease the volume for each of your instruments that you have loaded. So I'm just going to start with this all the way down and just play a chord, and then I'll just mix up the volume a little bit until I get the bounce somewhere where it sounds good. All right, so close enough. It sounds good. And in addition to the mute, solo, and volume slider, what you can also do is adjust the tuning, the pitch for each individual instance of, each individual Kontakt library. And you can also pan left or right each of the libraries that you have loaded. Now, if you want to adjust all of the instruments simultaneously, you have one option that basically affects all of the instruments that you currently have loaded. So if we go back to the workspace here and select master, these are essentially, it's the master editor or kind of global controls for every instrument that's loaded in Kontakt. So from here, you can adjust the overall volume of all 3 instruments. You can also adjust the tuning for everything. So if I just play a chord, so those are kind of the master editor controls that you have. I mean, there is also a built-in metronome. There's a tuner if you want. And, certain Kontakt instruments, they might be a sequenced instrument, like a step sequencer. So right now, because it's loaded as a plugin, the BPM is based off of Cubase's tempo or BPM. But if you're using Kontakt in the standalone version, and you have some sort of a sequence sound, you can always adjust the Kontakt's BPM from the master editor section. So we're not going to really use the master editor right now. So I'm just going to go back to my workspace and unselect it just to give us a little bit more room to work with here. Now that we've created our own multi-instrument, this is the point where you might want to save it and be able to recall it for future projects. So to save your multi-instrument, what you would do is click on the save icon up here and just select Save Multi As. So the dialog box will pop up, and this is how you're able to save your instrument. Now, I'm just going to save this to my desktop right now just to keep it simple. And one way that you can figure out if the file you're saving is a multi-instrument is it has the file extension name at the end, .nkm, as opposed to a individual Kontakt's instrument, which is a .nki file. Before we click save, just one thing I do want to point out is when I'm saving this multi-instrument, right now I'm only able to select the option patch only. And this is because these are licensed Kontakt instruments. So these are from Native Instruments. If you were creating your own Kontakt instrument and wanting to save it and maybe share it with someone, you would also have the ability to either select patch plus samples or monolith. So right now, patch only, it's basically just saving information about this multi-instrument. So it's, what instruments are loaded, what are the MIDI settings, the pans, the volume settings, and so on. If this was my own Kontakt instrument that I was creating, it would basically, if I selected patch plus samples, it would save the information about the multi plus a folder of all of the audio samples contained in the instrument that I was creating. Whereas the monolith option is basically just creating one file that contains the information and all of the samples. So it's just one file as opposed to the information file plus the folder of samples. But again, because these are licensed Native Instruments Kontakt libraries, I can only select patch only. So I'm just going to select my desktop here and just click on save. Now to access this file that we created, this multi-instrument, there's different ways that we can actually access this. But I would say the easiest way is using Kontakt's file browser to find the file and load it inside of Kontakt. So I'm just going to reset my multi here, just so we have nothing in here at the moment. And I will click on Files at the top. So in Files, this is where you're able to navigate through your computer system. So again, we saved the multi-instrument to my desktop. So in Files, I'll just select Desktop, and there we are. There's Brian's multi. So I can double click or just drag it into the rack view here. And there we go. So another type of instrument we can create inside of Kontakt is called an instrument bank. So an instrument bank basically lets you store up to 128 different Kontakt instruments all within one window. There's a couple different reasons why you might want to use something like an instrument bank. One, you could load, different articulation settings of the same instrument and program key switches to quickly switch between them. Let's say you're playing in a pit orchestra for a musical. Rather than having tons of Kontakt instruments loaded, you can essentially have all the instruments that you need all within one instrument bank. And again, program key switches to quickly switch back and forth between these different instruments. So to create a new instrument bank, currently I've cleared out my rack space in Kontakt. So again, you could just click this icon here and say reset multi. So while we're here, what we'll do is select new instrument bank. And now I have this new instrument bank inside of the rack view. So to access the different cells or the different slots to load your Kontakt instruments, just click the wrench icon here. And you can see this is slot 1, 2, 3, 4, and it goes all the way down to 128. So let's scroll back up to the top and, let's just do the, let's do the example of different articulation settings with a brass instrument. Let's just do a French horn. So I'm going to load up the Symphony series, the brass ensemble. And so I have horns here, and what you'll do is you'll basically just drag each one of these individual Kontakt instruments libraries into the individual cells. So the first one, I will click on horns legato, drag it to cell 1. We'll choose horns staccato to cell 2. We'll do expression for 3, and we'll do horn effects for slot 4. Now, one thing I want to point out is once you drag your instrument into each individual cell here, you really don't have access to, the nice GUI that you would if you were just loading that individual instrument directly into the rack here. If you do double click on any of these cells, it's basically bringing up Kontakt's kind of editor instrument mode where you can also add effects, but it doesn't have, that nice GUI that we've seen with previous instruments. So I'm just going to go back here and go back to the slots. So you can just click the gear icon if you ever do go into the kind of the instrument editor mode. So if I just click individually on these instances here and start playing the MIDI keyboard, we'll be able to hear the different instruments. So we have the horns legato. Switch it to staccato. Expression. And the horns effects. One thing you'll notice is when I click on these individual instruments in the instrument bank, the keys down here in the virtual keyboard are changing. So right now, the blue keys here are indicating the key range. So any of the keys that I play outside of this range, it's actually not going to generate any sound. But in the blue range here, it's actually playing notes. Now, these Kontakt instruments, the horn libraries, they also have their own key switches, which basically change also additional articulation or, sound characteristics for this instance. So these keys down here, these are key switches for, additional articulation settings for each instance that we have loaded. So with horns effects, if I just play the first note here, you can hear it's this pitch down effect. And if I select another key here, you hear these run-ups with the French horn. So I'm just going to go back to the first key here. So having different Kontakt instruments loaded into these slots, it's a great way to be able to quickly access, different articulation settings, or again, if you just want to have a bank of instruments to choose from with different types of sounds, you could always load these into an instrument bank. But when you're working on a track, or let's say in a live situation, again, if you're in the pit orchestra and you're playing and performing for a musical, having to go into Kontakt's GUI and manually click on each slot doesn't really make the most sense. You just want to be able to quickly switch these on the fly. So in order to create these key switches or these program changes, what we need to do is access this part of Kontakt called KSP, which stands for Kontakt Script Processor, which is a specific language for Kontakt that, basically it's a great tool if you're actually creating your own Kontakt instruments. But there are actually presets in there that, can do some cool things with inside of Kontakt. For example, pressing one key on your keyboard and it actually generates a chord for you. So in this KSP area is where we're going to be able to create our program changes. So pressing a key on your MIDI keyboard or another MIDI controller will actually change the slot's focus, or which instrument you are currently controlling. So to access the KSP area in Kontakt's window, you just click on KSP here, and it brings up the scripting area. So you have different slots, but what we'll do is we're just going to click on preset, and you can select factory here. And as I mentioned, there's certain scripts where it can create a chord, it can do intervals, but what we want to select is the transform section, and we will select notes to program change. So with this script, basically what's happening is it's translating a MIDI note, a note that we're playing on our keyboard, and changing it to a program change. So you press a key on your keyboard and it tells Kontakt, hey, switch to this slot or this one or this one. So to create the key switch range, one thing you'll want to do is just make sure that the keys that you are mapping to the program changes are outside of the normal keys that you're using. You don't want to necessarily program these changes to the middle of your keyboard. Otherwise, if you're playing, it could, cause some confusion and not exactly what you want to do. So typically I will put these program changes all the way at the end of the keyboard. So I will basically go to the very last octave on my MIDI keyboard using the octave change button. And what you can do is click on Learn Key Range and then just press the notes on the keyboard and it will automatically set the program changes for you. So I'm going to hit the lowest note, which is C-2, and I will hit the next note. In this case, I only have 4 slots, so I'll just go 4 notes up. So C, C sharp, D, and then D sharp, and that is my key range. So now if I press my MIDI keyboard here, I'm able to quickly change the instrument that I have selected in my instrument bank. So I have here, and I can just play it. I'll hit C sharp. And yeah, that's how you're using the Kontakt scripting in order to program your own program changes or key switches for an instrument bank. So just like a multi-instrument, you probably want to save this and be able to use this for future projects. So to do that, just click the Save Load icon at the top and just select Save As, and we'll do Bank 1. And now I will name this as Brian's Bank. And again, just like the file extension for a Kontakt multi-instrument, which was .nkm, for instrument bank, it is .nkb. So once you have it labeled, just click Save. Actually, sorry, we'll just change the location here. So I'll just do desktop, hit Save, and now we've saved our instrument bank. At this point, we've learned how to find and load individual Kontakt libraries, create multi-instruments, and instrument banks. Now, over time, you're going to be building up your database, your collection of multis, instrument banks, and just favorite Kontakt libraries that you like using. To load these instruments, multis, and instrument banks, we were using Kontakt's browser and the file navigation area. There's a much easier and faster way to load all of these types of files, and that's using a feature in KONTAKT called Quick Load. To show or hide the quick load area of KONTAKT, all you have to do is click on the workspaces icon at the top and then just select Quick Load. With Quick Load, we have three different options. We have the multi-area, bank, and instrument, and these three sections basically dictate what type of file or what type of instrument we're able to save to these individual sections. The instrument section is the place that you can add individual KONTAKT libraries to. So if I want to add 40's very own drums to the instrument section, I'm just going to select the 40's very own drums.nki and drag it into this section here. Now let's choose another instrument. Let's just do action strings 2, drag and drop, and one more just for good measure, we'll do Alicia's keys. Now to load any of these libraries, just double click or drag this file into the rack view, and it will load into KONTAKT. Now, if you want to remove anything from the instrument section, all you have to do is just right click and say delete from quick load. Now, as you can probably guess, the multi and the bank section are for KONTAKT multi-instruments and instrument banks. So we just created a KONTAKT multi before. So I'm going to select multi and I'm going to navigate to the file section. And we saved the multi to my desktop, and you can see it right here. So I'm just going to drag and drop this to the multi section. If I try to add an instrument bank to the multi section, it's not going to let me. I just need to make sure that I have the bank area selected, and now I can drag and drop the instrument bank that we also created. Rather than having just a giant list of instruments, multis, and instrument banks, you can actually create folders and organize this area a little bit more. To create a folder, all you have to do is just right click in the empty space here and say add new folder. And you can name this literally anything that you want. So I can say orchestral, and I can make another folder and just call this strings. And now I can drag this instrument bank to the strings folder and navigate to it that way. So adding some type of folder structure to your quick load area will help organize this space just a little bit more. With the multi-instrument that we created, all three of those instruments were being routed through one individual channel inside of Cubase. Now, if you're loading a KONTAKT library that is, let's say, a drum kit, all of the sounds in that kit are also going to be coming out of one channel inside of your DAW. When it comes time to the mixing process, you'll probably want to have a little bit more control over the volume of each individual sound. KONTAKT has an output section that lets you route the sound for individual instruments or sounds within an instrument to their own dedicated audio channels. This gives you more flexibility during the mixing process, controlling the volume of all of these sounds. So let's take a look how to use this and set this up properly. So I have a blank instance of KONTAKT loaded just so we're starting with a clean slate. The instrument that we'll use for this example is 40's very own drums. So let me just load up an instance and we are all set. So to view the output section in KONTAKT, what you'll do is click on the workspaces icon and select outputs. Now that the output section is visible, we need to configure the amount of channels we're going to need. So with 40's very own drums, there are 16 sounds. So we want to have each sound on its own output channel. So we'll need to create 16 channels. Now there's a couple ways to go about doing this, but I would say the easiest way is using the factory output configuration settings. So you can click on the preset batch configuration dropdown and select factory. From here, you have a handful of options to choose from. So for example, you could select mono 16, which would create 16 mono channels, or you could select something like stereo 16, which would create 16 stereo channels. Typically with drum sounds, you are dealing in mono. So in this case, I'm going to select mono 16 because again, we have 16 sounds that we need to route to their own channels. Rather than having all of these be labeled out 1, out 2, out 3, and so on, you can always rename these outputs just to give you a little bit more clarification as to, what audio is going through that channel. So for example, I can always name channel 1 kick. Now this next part is going to be instrument specific. So depending on what Kontakt library you have loaded, routing the audio from each individual cell to its own output channel is going to be slightly different depending on what instrument you have loaded. So with 40's very own drums, the area to route each individual pad will be located under the kit section. So if I click on any one of these cells, you can see I have this section labeled output. And this is where you're going to be routing the audio for each pad to its own output channel inside of Kontakt. So we'll just start with the first one and select kick and click the drop down here. Now, fortunately for 40's very own drums, there is this option, set all pads to sequential outputs. So what this will do is set the first pad, in this case kick, to output 1, the bass to output 2, and perk to output 3, rather than having to do each pad individually. So this will definitely save some time. So for this one, I'll just select this option here. And now if you trigger any of the cells, you'll see that it's routed to its own channel inside of the output section down below. We're only able to hear the kick drum because we now need to route each individual output inside of Kontakt to its own dedicated audio channel inside of my DAW. Now, this next part is going to be Cubase specific, but we have a handful of knowledge base articles that explain this next step for different DAWs like Ableton, Pro Tools, FL Studios. So if you are not using Cubase, I highly recommend checking out these articles just so you can figure out how to do this in your own DAW. So in Cubase, what I'll do is I'm just going to close out of Kontakt's window, and I'm going to open up my side pane and select the VSTi. Now in Cubase, what we'll have to do is activate the individual outputs. So I'm going to click this drop down, this triangle here, and select activate outputs. And I'm going to select everything here all the way up to output 16 because we created 16 outputs inside of Kontakt. If I open up the automation lane, I'm able to see all 16 output channels from Kontakt, or I can also open up the mixer page inside of Cubase and additionally see all 16 channels. So let me close out of this for a second and open up 40's very own drums. This instrument has a handful of pre-made patterns, so I'm just going to trigger one of them so we can hear some sound and hear and visually see each individual sound being routed to its own channel. So now that each sound is routed to its own channel inside of Cubase, it's a lot easier to bounce the levels of them and also apply effects to individual sounds. So with this type of configuration, you can now add effects to individual sounds inside of your DAW. So if you want to add some reverb just to the clap, you can always do that inside of the DAW that you're using. Now, the output section inside of Kontakt, you also have the ability to add a handful of effects to each individual channel. So if I click this icon here, you can see now I have a few additional drop-down options. So now let's just find this perk sound. And let's say we want to add some reverb just to that sound. I'll just click this drop down here and I can select from a wide variety of effects that come built into Kontakt. So I want to add a reverb. So I'll select the reverb option and change this to legacy reverb. So now if we trigger it, you can hear that sound has some reverb added to it. You can continue to add more effects in this chain. So let's say we want to add a delay. I'll just click the empty cell below, go to delay, and select one of them. Now, if you want to customize the parameters of these effects, all you have to do is click on the effect and the box appears above it. And this is where you can start adjusting the effect parameters. So for the delay, if we want to shorten the delay, you can just adjust the time knob here. If we want to make the reverb space larger, We can always increase the size, increase the dry wet amount. And this is another way that you can customize each individual sound inside of the output section of KONTAKT. Hopefully by now you can understand how powerful of a tool KONTAKT 7 is. For more clarification on anything we went over, or you just want to know some things in more detail, make sure you check out the online manual and have fun with KONTAKT 7.